A sedan crashes through a white wooden fence in slow motion, debris flying in every direction. The car plunges nose first into a crystalline backyard pool, water erupting skyward. A woman's face appears in the driver's window, panicked, eyes wide. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window at 7:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in June. Sarah Chin stood at the counter, her coffee cooling in a ceramic mug decorated with her daughter's handprints. She was reviewing the volunteer schedule for the community center when her phone buzzed with a text from her husband, Marcus. Running late. Client meeting ran over. Home by 6. Sarah smiled. Typical Marcus. The man who built his reputation on being reliable, on delivering results on time, except when it came to his actual family's schedule. She didn't resent it, not really. His work paid for the house, for the renovations they'd completed last year, for the new pool that their 8-year-old daughter Emma had requested for her birthday. The pool had been installed just 3 weeks ago. It was modest, 12 by 24 feet, but it dominated their backyard with the intensity of a new luxury. Emma had already logged approximately 400 hours in it, or so it felt to Sarah. She'd even hired a swimming instructor who came twice a week, a college kid named Derek who had endless patience and a whistle that could wake the dead. Sarah checked the time. She needed to pick up Emma from her friend Lily's house by noon. Emma's playdate had been scheduled for 10 a.m., and Sarah had planned to use the 2-hour window to get her hair cut, something she hadn't managed in 4 months. The guilt of self-care was already creeping in, the way it always did. She finished her coffee and moved to the living room window, looking out at their neighborhood street. Maple Grove was the kind of place where people waved from their cars and knew each other's names. The Patels lived to the left, with their 3 sons and their annoyingly perfect lawn. To the right were the Johnsons, a retired couple who'd lived in their house for 32 years and remembered when this street was all farm properties and dirt roads. Sarah's own house was a 1970s ranch style with a wraparound porch, painted a soft sage green. She and Marcus had spent 2 years restoring it. The backyard, which had been an eyesore of dead grass and a collapsing shed, now featured the pool, a new patio area, and a pergola that Marcus had built himself, poorly, Sarah thought affectionately, though it was becoming charming in its architectural rebellion. The front door opened. Emma bounced in, still in her pajamas, her dark hair tangled and wild. "Mom! Can I go to the pool before Lily's?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer. "It's 7:45 in the morning, baby," Sarah said, brushing her daughter's hair from her face. "Pool after breakfast. After your hair is brushed. After you're actually awake." Emma groaned with the theatrical despair only an 8-year-old can muster, as if her mother had just announced the cancellation of Christmas. "Plus, you're going to Lily's house," Sarah reminded her. "Remember? You have a playdate." "I'd rather stay home," Emma said, plopping onto the couch. "I know, but you've been looking forward to this all week. Lily's mom is making those cookies you like. The ones with the sprinkles." Sprinkles. This seemed to mollify Emma, who dragged herself off the couch and toward the kitchen. Sarah made mental notes: brush teeth, change clothes, make lunch for the playdate, pack Emma's favorite water bottle. The morning continued in its familiar rhythm. By 10:15 a.m., Sarah had dropped Emma off at the Johnsons' house. Wait, no, not the Johnsons. Sarah had dropped her at Lily's house 3 blocks over, given Lily's mom a $40 gift card to Starbucks as a thank you, and received a wave from Lily's father who was washing their sedan in the driveway. The car was silver. Sarah remembered thinking it was a nice car. She remembered thinking about how she and Marcus should probably get their car washed sometime. The hair salon, main attraction, was located in the small shopping center near the library. Sarah had secured a 10:45 a.m. appointment, her first in months. The stylist, a woman named Bethany who Sarah had used for years, had the kind of energy that could lift Sarah out of her perpetual state of parental exhaustion. "Look at you," Bethany said, spinning Sarah's chair around to face the mirror. "You look tired." Thank you, Sarah laughed. I'm serious. When's the last time you did something for yourself? April? Sarah said, then corrected herself. No. January. Bethany made a tooting sound and began mixing hair dye. They fell into their familiar pattern of conversation. Bethany talked about her own kids, her ex-husband, the latest drama at the salon. Sarah half listened, half dozed under the warm lights, feeling the tension in her shoulders slowly release. At 11:30 a.m., Sarah's phone rang. It was the salon's landline calling from the front desk. Her heart performed its usual lurch. Anytime a parent received a call during a playdate, the terrible possibilities immediately suggested themselves: broken bone, allergic reaction, behavioral incident, abduction. Sarah waved her hand frantically at Bethany, who was mid-highlight. Sarah, the voice on the phone belonged to Patricia, the salon's receptionist. There's someone here looking for you. Says it's urgent. Sarah's mouth went dry. Who? A woman. She seems upset. Bethany was already removing the plastic cape from Sarah's shoulders, and Sarah was already standing up, still half blonde, half dark brown, looking like a jigsaw puzzle of herself in the mirror. I'm coming, Sarah said. She grabbed her purse and hurried to the front of the salon, her hair still wet with dye, partially wrapped in foil. The woman standing in the waiting area was someone Sarah didn't recognize. She was tall, middle-aged, with dark hair and an expression of fury that immediately put Sarah's nervous system into overdrive. The woman wore a sundress with a large stain near the hem, and her hands were shaking. Are you Sarah Chen? The woman demanded. Yes. What's happened? Is Emma? Your daughter is fine, the woman said, and Sarah felt approximately 10,000 pounds of pressure release from her chest. But we need to talk about your property. Your pool. There's been an accident. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. What kind of accident? I drove into it, the woman said flatly. My car is in your pool. And I need you to come home right now because the police are already there, and I need you to hear what I have to say before you talk to them. The words didn't make sense. Sarah's brain couldn't construct them into a coherent sentence. A car. In the pool. How does a car end up in a pool? What happened? Sarah asked. Your property is a hazard, the woman said, her voice rising. That fence is too low. Your shrubs block the sightline from the street. I was driving down your block, I live 2 streets over, and something caused my car to veer. I couldn't correct it. I went right through your fence and into that pool. Sarah was already moving toward the door. Bethany grabbed her arm gently. Sarah, you're still in foils, Bethany said carefully. Maybe wash out first. But Sarah was shaking her head, moving toward her car. I'm sorry. I have to go. The drive home took 5 minutes, though it felt like 50. Sarah's mind was racing through a series of increasingly catastrophic scenarios. What if Emma had been in the backyard? What if she'd been in the pool? She'd been at Lily's, Sarah reminded herself. Emma was safe at Lily's house. But what if the accident had happened earlier? What if something had changed? She pressed harder on the accelerator. When Sarah turned onto Maple Grove Drive, she could see the police cars immediately. 2 of them. Their lights were on, rotating in that slow, deliberate way that suggested this wasn't an emergency, it was an investigation. The fence at the front of the property was destroyed. Completely destroyed. Wood splinters and pieces were scattered across the street and onto the property. It looked like an explosion had occurred. And beyond it, visible through the gap in the fence, Sarah could see the rear end of a sedan sticking up out of the pool at an alarming angle, the back bumper pointing toward the sky like an accusation. Her pool. The pool she'd wanted so badly, that had cost more money than she wanted to admit, that had taken 3 weeks to fill. It was partially drained now, water sloshing over the sides, creating a river across the patio. An officer approached her as she parked her car. He was young, maybe early 30s, with a name tag that read, Officer Hernandez. "Are you the homeowner?" he asked. "I'm Sarah Chen. This is my house. My husband is Marcus." "What happened? How did this happen?" "The driver says her vehicle experienced mechanical failure," Officer Hernandez said, consulting a small notebook. "She's over there." He pointed toward a woman sitting in the back of one of the police cars. Sarah recognized her. It was the woman from the salon. But from this distance, in the daylight, Sarah could see that the woman's face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy. She looked terrified. She also looked, Sarah thought, like she was rehearsing some kind of story in her mind, her lips moving slightly as if she were practicing words. "Is anyone hurt?" Sarah asked. "No injuries," Officer Hernandez said. She was the only person in the vehicle. The driver managed to exit without incident once the vehicle settled. Sarah felt a surge of relief so profound that her knees almost buckled. Emma was safe. No one was hurt. "Has there been an accident before? Anything like this?" Officer Hernandez asked. "No," Sarah said. "Never. Our fence was, brand new. Well, relatively new. We had it installed 6 months ago. It's a standard 4-foot privacy fence. Very sturdy." "And the shrubs?" Hernandez asked. Sarah turned and looked at the landscaping. Hostas, maybe 3 feet tall at most, the same hostas they'd planted 2 years ago. They weren't close to the street. They weren't blocking anything. "They're not that big," Sarah said. "How fast was she going?" "The driver reports she was traveling at approximately 25 miles per hour, Hernandez said. "The street speed limit is 25. She claims she swerved to avoid something but wasn't sure what. 25 miles per hour should not be enough to send a car through a fence and into a pool." Sarah knew this instinctively. She'd seen car crashes before, had a vague understanding of physics. At 25 miles per hour, you might dent something. You might cause damage. But to go through a fence, to go several feet into the yard, to end up in a pool. "Something doesn't add up," Sarah said aloud. Officer Hernandez looked at her with an expression of professional neutrality. "Do you have video surveillance? A ring camera, any kind of exterior monitoring?" Sarah's heart stopped. She and Marcus had been meaning to install security cameras for months. They'd talked about it, looked at options online, made a list of pros and cons. It was on the list of things they were going to do this summer, right after they finished the pergola and before they planned the fall garden. "No," Sarah said slowly. "We don't have cameras." Hernandez made a note. "Well, the woman's insurance will need to cover the damage to your property and your pool. That will all go through the standard claims process. We're documenting everything for the report." Over the next hour, Sarah watched as the tow truck arrived and slowly extracted the sedan from the pool. It was a silver sedan, identical to the one she'd seen in the Johnsons' driveway. The car emerged covered in pool water, its windshield cracked, the hood crumpled from the impact of hitting the pool's edge. The interior was soaked. Everything inside, the upholstery, the electronics, the personal effects, was ruined. The woman, who Sarah learned was named Patricia Knowles, sat in the police car and watched her vehicle being removed from the pool with an expression of growing despair. She was dressed in a sundress that Sarah could now see had a significant amount of pool water damage. Her shoes, white tennis shoes, were soaked and dripping. Patricia made statements to Officer Hernandez about mechanical failure. She said her accelerator had stuck. She said the steering felt unresponsive. She said she tried to brake but the car wouldn't stop. She said something had startled her in the road, maybe an animal, maybe a person, and she'd swerved instinctively and lost control. Each explanation contradicted the previous one. "I want you to know it's not my fault," Patricia said, loud enough for Sarah to hear. I had a medical episode. A seizure. This has nothing to do with my driving. A seizure? Sarah looked at Officer Hernandez, who was writing this down, his expression carefully neutral. By 2 p.m., the police had finished their initial investigation. Officer Hernandez gave Sarah a report number and told her to call her insurance company. Patricia Knowles was released with a promise to provide additional information if needed. She limped back toward the street. One of her shoes was missing, apparently lost in the pool during the extraction, and disappeared around the corner. Sarah called Marcus. He came home immediately, leaving his client in the lurch. When he arrived, he stood in the backyard and stared at the damage, the destroyed fence, the drained pool, the wet patio, the divots in the grass where the sedan had carved its path. "How did this happen?" he asked. Sarah explained everything. The woman, the seizure, the mechanical failure, the contradictory stories. "Do we have video?" Marcus asked. "No," Sarah said. "We never got around to it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We should have." It was a statement of fact, not an accusation, but it hit Sarah with the force of criticism anyway. She felt the weight of all the decisions she'd made and deferred to make, the cameras, the pergola, the pool itself. All the choices that had seemed important and urgent in the moment but that, in the wake of this accident, revealed themselves to be inadequate. "We need to call our insurance company," Sarah said. "And then we need to figure out how much this is going to cost." Marcus was already on his phone, calling their insurance agent. But before they could sort through any of the logistics, before they could even begin to process what had happened, another vehicle pulled up to the curb. It was the silver sedan from Lily's driveway. Lily's father, a man Sarah had seen only in passing before, they'd waved, exchanged the standard suburban pleasantries, got out of the car. His expression was urgent, almost alarmed. "Sarah," he called out, jogging toward her. "I heard about the accident. I just wanted to make sure, I wanted to check that Emma is okay. I heard a car went into someone's pool, and I didn't know if." "Emma's at your house," Sarah said. "At Lily's. She's fine. We checked on her already." Lily's father, Tom, Sarah remembered now, his name was Tom, looked confused. "But that's the thing," he said. "Lily and Emma went to the pool 2 hours ago. We set up a splash pad in the yard. They're in the backyard right now." Sarah's blood turned to ice. They hadn't been at Lily's house. Emma had been in her own backyard. Where the car came through. Where it crashed into the pool. Sarah turned to the drained pool, to the divots in the grass, to the gap in the fence where the sedan had entered. She tried to calculate trajectories in her mind, tried to figure out where Emma would have been standing, whether she could have been in the path of the vehicle. "Where exactly in the backyard?" Sarah asked Tom, her voice very small. "Near the pool," Tom said. "But they heard the crash and came running inside. They're terrified, but they're fine. They weren't in the pool. They weren't even close enough to be hurt. They were playing in the splash pad, which is on the patio." Sarah's knees buckled. Marcus caught her arm, holding her steady. The next morning, Sarah woke at 3:47 a.m. with her heart hammering in her chest. She'd been dreaming about the car crashing into the pool, except in the dream, Emma was in it. Her daughter was drowning in the pool, trapped inside the sinking sedan, and Sarah couldn't reach her, couldn't break the glass, couldn't save her. Sarah got out of bed, careful not to wake Marcus, and went downstairs. The house was silent and dark. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. The fence was gone. The pool was empty, they'd fully drained it, and the contractor had confirmed that the structural damage was severe. The water damage alone meant it would need to be completely rebuilt. The cost was going to be staggering. Their insurance company had been sympathetic but also immediately skeptical about the story. A car, driven at 25 miles per hour, had crashed through a wooden fence and into a concrete pool. That seems unlikely, the claims adjuster had said. We'll need to investigate this thoroughly. Sarah had given them Officer Hernandez's report number. She'd told them everything Patricia Knowles had said. She'd made it clear that this was not their fault, that a woman had driven a car into their pool while they weren't home. The insurance company had assigned an adjuster named Keith Mitchell. He would be coming by this morning to document everything. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Knowles. Can we talk? I need to explain what really happened. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. She didn't respond. Instead, she called Marcus and told him about the text. Don't talk to her, Marcus said immediately. Anything she says could be used against her in a lawsuit, and anything you say could be twisted into something that hurts us. I'm not going to sue her, Sarah said. I know, but her insurance company is going to want to minimize the payout. If she can convince you to say something that suggests this was partially our fault, it could affect the claim. Sarah knew Marcus was right, but she was also curious. What did Patricia want to explain? What could she possibly say that would make any of this make sense? Keith Mitchell arrived at 9 a.m. He was a small man, efficient and businesslike, with a camera and a measuring tape and a clipboard. He photographed everything: the destroyed fence, the empty pool, the divots in the grass, the water damage on the patio. He took measurements and made notes. He looked at the landscaping, the hostas, the shrubs, the sight lines from the street. Can I ask you something? Sarah said while Keith was photographing the fence line. Sure, he said, not looking up from his camera. Does this seem strange to you? A car going through a fence at 25 miles per hour? Keith lowered the camera and looked at Sarah over the top of his glasses. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, is that even possible? Shouldn't it require a higher speed? A mechanical failure? Something more than just driving at the speed limit? Physics can be surprising, Keith said. If the fence was in poor condition, if there was something wrong with its installation, if the angle of impact was just right, then yes, it's possible. But it's also possible that the driver was traveling faster than she reported. It's possible she wasn't paying attention. It's possible that her version of events is not entirely accurate. There it was again, the implication that Patricia's story might be a lie. She said she had a seizure, Sarah said. She said it was a medical episode. Yes, Keith said. That's what the police report states. But she also said her accelerator stuck. She also said something startled her. Those are three different explanations for the same event. People often adjust their stories after the fact, especially if the first version makes them look bad. Sarah felt something dark and cold settle in her chest. Patricia had lied. Or if not lied, then certainly bent the truth to make herself look better. And that lie, or that bending of truth, could affect the insurance claim. It could make their insurance company skeptical. It could delay payment. It could cost them even more money. Keith finished his documentation by noon. He told Sarah and Marcus that the claim was being processed and that they should expect initial contact from Patricia's insurance company within the next few days. Are they going to deny the claim? Marcus asked. Unlikely, Keith said. The driver caused the damage. That's pretty clear. But they might dispute the extent of the damage, or they might try to claim that your property contributed to the accident, poor fence installation, inadequate sight lines, that kind of thing. That's why documentation like this is important. You're covered. After Keith left, Sarah finally responded to Patricia's text, "We're not supposed to communicate directly. This needs to go through insurance." The response came almost immediately, "I know. But I need you to know something. I didn't have a seizure. I lied to the police. I don't know why I said it. I panicked. The truth is worse." Sarah stared at the message. She didn't respond. She showed it to Marcus. "This is exactly what I warned you about," Marcus said. She's trying to get in your head. She's trying to confuse the narrative. Do not respond to her. But Sarah was already thinking about Patricia, about what she'd looked like in the police car, about the way her lips had been moving, as if she were practicing a story. About how her explanations had shifted and changed. About the sundress with the pool water stain, the missing shoe, the expression of someone spiraling. That afternoon, Sarah picked up Emma from school. Emma seemed fine, resilient in the way of children, though she was asking a lot of questions about why the pool was gone. It broke, Sarah said, which was technically true. We're going to have to fix it. When? Emma asked. Not for a while, Sarah said. We'll have a new pool eventually. But it's going to take some time. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm glad I wasn't in the pool when the car came. Me too, baby, Sarah said, reaching back to squeeze her daughter's hand. That evening, another text came from Patricia, the car didn't have mechanical failure. I wasn't having a seizure. I was on my phone. I was texting. I looked down for 2 seconds and when I looked up, I was already through the fence. I didn't know what else to say to the police. I was scared. Sarah read the message 3 times. She didn't show this one to Marcus. Instead, she saved it and felt the weight of Patricia's confession settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. Distracted driving. That was it. Patricia had been texting and driving, and in a moment of inattention, she'd crashed her car into their yard. Into their pool. Potentially into their daughter. The anger that Sarah felt in response was immediate and white-hot. This woman had lied to police. This woman had made up stories about seizures and mechanical failure. This woman had endangered Emma's life because she couldn't put her phone down for a 2-minute drive through a residential neighborhood. Why are you telling me this? Sarah texted back. The response took several minutes to arrive, because I need you to forgive me. Because I can't live with what I've done. Because I keep thinking about how close I came to hitting a child, and it's destroying me. I'm in therapy now. My insurance is going to cover everything. But I need you to know that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I made a terrible mistake. Sarah deleted the messages. She told herself not to think about Patricia anymore. She told herself to focus on the insurance claim, on the pool restoration, on getting her life back to normal. But 3 days later, when the police showed up at her door with Officer Hernandez and a woman in a suit, Sarah realized that everything had changed. We found something on the traffic camera, Officer Hernandez said. From the intersection 3 blocks down. We reviewed the footage from the day of the accident, and we saw something that contradicts the driver's original statement. Sarah's heart began to race. What did you find? The woman in the suit introduced herself as Detective Rodriguez. She had a tablet with her, and she pulled up a video file. This is from 12:47 p.m. on the day of the accident, Detective Rodriguez said. Just 4 minutes before the collision with your property. She played the video. It showed a silver sedan at a residential intersection. The car was not traveling at 25 miles per hour. The car was traveling at approximately 50 miles per hour, easily double the speed limit. The vehicle ran a red light without braking or slowing. My God, Sarah whispered. The driver then continued at high speed through 2 more residential blocks, Detective Rodriguez said. She scrolled to the next timestamp. At 12:51 p.m., which is when your fence was struck, the vehicle was accelerating, not decelerating. There is no evidence of braking until after the impact with the pool. Sarah sat down. Her legs didn't feel like they could support her weight. She lied, Sarah said. She lied about everything. It appears so, Detective Rodriguez confirmed. And according to the medical examiner's preliminary report, toxicology tests from the scene showed the presence of methamphetamine in her system. The driver has a prior DUI conviction, dating back 8 years. She also has a prior conviction for driving with a suspended license. Marcus, who had been standing behind Sarah, let out a sound that was almost a growl. She was high, he said. She was on methamphetamine and driving at 50 miles per hour through a residential street. We believe so, Detective Rodriguez said. We're conducting a more thorough investigation. We're looking for additional footage. We're reviewing her phone records to see if the distracted driving claim has merit, or if that was just a cover story for something worse. We wanted to inform you before we file the formal charges. What kind of charges? Sarah asked. We're considering reckless endangerment, driving under the influence, driving with a suspended license, and property destruction, Detective Rodriguez said. The fact that there was a child in the vicinity increases the severity of the reckless endangerment charge. Sarah felt something shift inside her. The car crash was no longer an accident. It was a crime. Patricia Knowles was no longer a woman who'd made a terrible mistake. She was a criminal who'd raced through her neighborhood while intoxicated, and who had lied to police in an attempt to avoid responsibility. Patricia Knowles was arrested 4 days later at her home. The police found her with additional drugs, drug paraphernalia, and empty bottles of alcohol in her house. She was taken into custody without incident, though reports indicated she was hysterical during the process, alternating between crying and making threats. Sarah watched the entire thing from her kitchen window as the police cars pulled up to a house 3 streets over. She recognized Patricia from the backyard, a small, modern house with a manicured front lawn and a Tesla in the driveway. The house of someone living a functional life, or at least someone who was good at making it look that way. The charges, once filed, became public record. Sarah's curiosity got the better of her, and she spent an evening researching Patricia Knowles online. What she found was a woman whose life had clearly been coming apart for years. Patricia had been married once, to a man named David Knowles. They had a daughter together, a girl named Samantha who was now 16 and living with David in another state. The divorce had been finalized 3 years ago, and according to the court records that were publicly available, David had been awarded primary custody due to concerns about the mother's lifestyle and substance abuse. Patricia had failed a drug test during the custody battle. She'd admitted to using methamphetamine. There had been a period where she'd lost her job, had been homeless for several months, and had subsequently entered rehabilitation. She'd been clean for about 18 months before relapsing 2 years ago. She had a public defender now. Her first court date was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Sarah felt a complicated mixture of emotions when she read this information. On one hand, Patricia was clearly someone struggling with serious addiction issues. On the other hand, Patricia had also made a choice to get high before driving. Patricia had also made a choice to speed through a residential neighborhood. Patricia had also made a choice to lie to police instead of admitting what she'd done. The sympathy and the rage were both present in Sarah's chest, competing for dominance. You can't let yourself feel sorry for her, Marcus said when Sarah made the mistake of voicing these thoughts. She almost killed our daughter. I know that, Sarah said. But if she'd gotten help, if her family had supported her, maybe this wouldn't have happened. That's not our responsibility, Marcus said, and Sarah knew he was right. The insurance claim moved forward. Patricia's insurance company, which had initially been skeptical of the hit-and-run scenario Patricia had described, quickly accepted liability once the traffic camera footage was provided. They issued a check for the fence and the pool damage, though it was less than the contractor's estimate by about $8,000. That gap would come from Sarah and Marcus's own pocket, or would require taking out a loan, or would require doing the work themselves over time. The pergola, it turned out, was the least of their problems. 2 weeks after the arrest, Patricia's public defender filed a motion requesting that Sarah and Marcus provide a statement for the defense. Patricia was claiming that she had been suffering a psychiatric episode at the time of the accident and that she had no memory of driving at high speed or lying to police. She wanted to introduce evidence that her mental state was compromised, and she wanted Sarah and Marcus to testify to what they'd observed about her demeanor on the day of the accident. Absolutely not, Marcus said, reading the motion. We're not helping her defense. We don't have to, said their own attorney, a man named Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah, though they joked about it, who Sarah and Marcus had hired to protect their interests. The prosecution will present its case. The defense will present theirs. You're not obligated to participate in either. But Sarah was thinking about Emma. She was thinking about the fact that Patricia had a daughter too. A daughter who was 16, who had lost her mother to addiction, who had been uprooted from her home and placed with her father in another state. What would Patricia's daughter do if her mother went to prison? What would happen to her? I'm not saying we should help her, Sarah said to Marcus. I'm just saying, maybe we should understand what's going on with her. What's going on with her is that she's an addict who made bad choices, Marcus said. And those bad choices almost cost us our daughter. That's all I need to understand. Sarah let the subject drop, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 weeks after the arrest, the court date arrived. Sarah and Marcus attended, though they weren't required to be there. They sat in the back of the courtroom and watched Patricia Knowles be led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled to her waist. The woman looked destroyed. She'd lost weight, her cheekbones were sharp, her skin was gray. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she'd been crying constantly. She looked like someone who'd been living in a nightmare and had just realized it was real. The prosecutor presented the evidence, the traffic camera footage showing the high-speed driving, the toxicology report showing methamphetamine in her system, the police report documenting her lie about the seizure, the evidence of her prior DUI and suspended license. Patricia's public defender, a woman named Margaret Hayes, presented a psychiatric evaluation indicating that Patricia was suffering from bipolar disorder with psychotic features, complicated by substance abuse. The evaluation suggested that Patricia's actions on the day of the accident were the result of a dissociative state brought on by her mental illness. My client does not dispute that she caused the accident, Margaret Hayes told the court. However, she was not in control of her actions at the time. She did not have the mental capacity to form the intent required for reckless endangerment. She requires treatment, not prison. The judge, a woman named Morrison, listened to both sides and issued her ruling. Patricia would be held on bail pending trial, with the condition that she enter an inpatient psychiatric and addiction treatment facility immediately. She was to have no contact with the Chen family. She was ordered to maintain sobriety and attend regular drug tests. The evidence presented suggests a serious mental health crisis complicated by substance abuse, Judge Morrison said. While the defendant's actions were objectively reckless and dangerous, the court finds merit in the defense's argument that psychiatric intervention may be more appropriate than punitive measures at this time. However, this is a serious case, and the trial will proceed. The court is setting a trial date for 6 months from now. After the hearing, as Sarah and Marcus were leaving the courthouse, they ran into Margaret Hayes in the hallway. I want to apologize to you, Margaret Hayes said to Sarah. I know my client's actions caused you and your family tremendous distress. That's not lost on me. But I want you to understand that Patricia is a sick woman. She's not a monster. She's someone who has been struggling with addiction and mental illness for years, and who has finally crashed hard enough that there might be a possibility for real recovery. Sarah didn't know what to say. Marcus took her arm and moved toward the exit. What my client did was wrong, Margaret Hayes continued, following them. But what happens next, what happens to Patricia, has the potential to either break her completely or give her a chance to rebuild her life. I hope you'll consider that when the time comes. Sarah wanted to tell her that none of this was her problem, that Patricia had made her own choices, that they had to protect their family first. But something in her throat was tight, and all she could do was nod. The trial date arrived on a cold December morning, 6 months after the accident. Sarah had missed work to attend, and she sat in the courtroom flanked by Marcus and their attorney Robert Chen. The prosecutor, a man named David Torres, built his case methodically. The traffic camera footage was entered into evidence. The toxicology report was confirmed by an expert witness. The officer who'd responded to the scene testified about Patricia's inconsistent statements. Derek, the swimming instructor who had been present on the day of the accident and had witnessed part of the immediate aftermath, testified that the car had been traveling at an alarming speed when it broke through the fence. Then Patricia took the stand. She was sober now, genuinely sober, and it showed. She'd gained weight back. Her skin was clear. Her eyes were focused, but they were also haunted. She wore a gray dress instead of an orange jumpsuit, and her hands no longer trembled. The prosecutor questioned her about her drug use, her prior convictions, her suspended license. Patricia answered everything directly, without evasion. Yes, she'd been using methamphetamine. Yes, she knew her license was suspended. Yes, she knew it was illegal to drive. Why did you drive on the day in question? The prosecutor asked. I needed to get to my dealer's house, Patricia said, her voice steady. I'd run out of methamphetamine. I was in withdrawal. I was experiencing anxiety and physical discomfort. I made the decision to drive despite knowing it was illegal and despite knowing that I was high. There was no excuse in her tone, just a statement of fact. Did you remember hitting the fence? Did you remember going into the pool? I remember some of it, Patricia said. It's fragmented. I remember seeing the fence, and I remember feeling the impact. After that, it's like a dream. The police were there, and I was out of the car, and I was wet and confused. And I lied to them. Why did you lie? Because I was terrified, Patricia said. Because I didn't want to admit that I was driving intoxicated. Because I was thinking about my daughter, about how disappointed she would be in me. About how this would confirm everything her father had said about me being a worthless addict. I wanted to create a version of events where I wasn't completely to blame. I was selfish. I was protecting myself instead of taking responsibility. The prosecutor sat down, and Margaret Hayes stood to cross-examine her client. Patricia, I want to clarify something, Margaret Hayes said gently. At the time of the accident, you were also experiencing psychiatric symptoms. Is that correct? Yes, Patricia said. I was having hallucinations. I was hearing voices. I was in a paranoid state. My psychiatrist believes I was experiencing the onset of a psychotic episode. Did these psychiatric symptoms influence your decision to drive? Yes, Patricia said. The voices were telling me I needed to get to my dealer. They were telling me I was in danger. They were telling me things that weren't true. But that doesn't excuse the fact that I got behind the wheel. It doesn't excuse the fact that I drove recklessly. It doesn't excuse the fact that I lied to the police. Margaret Hayes had no further questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Patricia guilty of reckless endangerment and driving under the influence. They found her not guilty of the more serious charges of attempted assault with a deadly weapon or assault on a child, based on the lack of evidence that Patricia had intentionally tried to hit anyone. But they were clear in their verdict: Patricia Knowles was guilty of driving dangerously while intoxicated. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Sarah felt no triumph in the guilty verdict. She felt instead a strange exhaustion, a sense that justice had been served but that nothing had really been resolved. Patricia was still an addict. Emma still could have been killed. The pool was still destroyed. The fence was still gone. The money was still being taken from their insurance and their own savings. The fear that Sarah experienced every time Emma went outside was still there, a low-level anxiety that had settled into her bones. The night before sentencing, Sarah received a letter in the mail. The envelope had been screened by the Attorney General's office, and it contained a handwritten note from Patricia. Dear Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you, and I know this letter will only cause you pain. But I need you to know that I am profoundly sorry for what I did. I was not in my right mind on that day, but that is not your problem. That is my problem. I chose to drive. I chose to use drugs. I chose to lie. I chose all of it. I keep thinking about your daughter. I keep thinking about how close I came to killing a child because I was too weak to stay sober. I've been in recovery now for almost a year. I'm in therapy. I'm taking medication for my psychiatric illness. I'm rebuilding my relationship with my own daughter, who has, remarkably, forgiven me things I don't know how to forgive myself for. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that when I sit in my cell at night, the thing that haunts me most is not the consequences I'm facing. It's the image of your daughter playing in your backyard, the backyard I destroyed. It's the knowledge that I almost took a child's life. It's the understanding that I did this to a family that had done nothing to me. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better, to be sober, to be the kind of mother and person that my daughter can be proud of. I will never be able to make this right. But I can stop making it worse. The courtroom on the day of sentencing was nearly empty. Patricia had no family in attendance, her ex-husband had declined to come, and her daughter, who was in school across the country, could not attend. Sarah and Marcus were there. A few reporters were scattered in the back, representing the local news outlets that had covered the story with the kind of attention that was reserved for cases with unusual elements. The car in the pool was inherently newsworthy in a way that a typical DUI was not. Judge Morrison entered and took her seat. Patricia was brought in, and she stood at the defendant's table in the same gray dress she'd worn during the trial. Margaret Hayes stood beside her, hand on Patricia's shoulder in a gesture of legal solidarity. The prosecutor, David Torres, presented the sentencing recommendation. Given the severity of the reckless endangerment charge, given the fact that a child had been endangered, given Patricia's prior criminal history, the prosecution recommended 3 years in state prison followed by 5 years of probation. Margaret Hayes presented the defense's argument for leniency. She cited Patricia's guilty plea, her cooperation with the investigation, her commitment to recovery, her documented psychiatric illness, and her potential for rehabilitation. She recommended 2 years in county jail with the remainder of the sentence suspended pending successful completion of a drug treatment program. Patricia herself requested the opportunity to address the court. She approached the stand with measured steps, and she looked directly at Judge Morrison. She did not look at Sarah or Marcus, as if she understood that some confrontations required both parties to be willing. "Your Honor," Patricia began, and her voice was steady. "I've spent the past 6 months trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would drive intoxicated through a residential neighborhood. Who would endanger a child? Who would lie to police? And I've come to understand that I didn't just become that person on the day of the accident. I became that person over years of choices. Years of telling myself that the rules didn't apply to me. Years of prioritizing my addiction over my responsibilities, my family, my humanity." Patricia took a breath. "I have a daughter who is 16 years old. Her name is Samantha. When I was arrested, she was devastated, but she was not surprised. She told me that she had known for years that I was capable of this. She had seen the warning signs. She had tried to help me, and I had rejected her help because I wanted the drugs more than I wanted her." Patricia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "There is a child in this community who was playing in her backyard when I drove through her neighborhood in a state of drug-induced psychosis. That child could be dead right now. And if she were, if I had killed her, I would deserve every year of prison that this court could sentence me to. I would deserve to spend the rest of my life in prison. Because there is no sentence equal to the crime of taking a child's life." Patricia looked directly at Judge Morrison. "I don't deserve leniency. I deserve to be punished. But I also believe that I deserve the opportunity to become someone different. Someone better. Someone my daughter can look in the eye without shame. Someone who contributes to her community instead of threatening it. I'm not asking this court to go easy on me because I feel sorry for myself. I'm asking this court to impose a sentence that is appropriate to the crime I've committed, and then to trust that I will use whatever time I have to become better." Patricia walked back to her seat and sat down. Judge Morrison read her statement in a clear, authoritative voice. "This is a serious case involving reckless endangerment of a minor," Judge Morrison said. The defendant's actions created an immediate and severe threat to public safety. The fact that no one was physically harmed is a matter of luck, not good judgment. The defendant's prior criminal history, combined with her addiction and documented mental health issues, indicates a pattern of behavior that has not previously been successfully addressed. Judge Morrison paused. However, the court also recognizes that the defendant has shown genuine remorse and has taken steps toward recovery. The court recognizes that incarceration alone does not address the underlying issues of addiction and mental illness that led to this crime. The court also recognizes that the defendant has a daughter who has already lost years of relationship with her mother due to the defendant's addiction, and that excessive punishment will not serve the interests of justice or rehabilitation. Judge Morrison looked at Patricia directly. Therefore, the court sentences Patricia Knowles to 18 months in state prison, with credit for time served. Upon release, the defendant will be placed on supervised probation for 5 years, with the condition that she complete a comprehensive drug treatment program and maintain psychiatric care. The defendant is also ordered to pay restitution to the victims of this crime in the amount of $12,000, which will cover the remaining cost of property damage. This court recommends that the defendant's prison time be served in a facility that offers both psychiatric and addiction treatment services. The gavel came down. Patricia's face crumpled, and Margaret Hayes pulled her into an embrace. It was less time than the prosecution had recommended, but it was not the light sentence that the defense had hoped for. It was a middle ground, acknowledgement of guilt and the seriousness of the crime, balanced against the potential for rehabilitation and the extenuating circumstances of mental illness. As Sarah and Marcus stood to leave, Patricia turned and made eye contact with Sarah for the first time since her arrest. There was no plea for forgiveness in her eyes, no expectation of mercy. There was only an acknowledgement of what she had done and what she had destroyed. Sarah nodded slightly, a gesture that was not quite forgiveness but was not quite condemnation either. It was recognition. It was acknowledgement that Patricia Knowles was a human being with a complexity that extended beyond the crime she had committed. Then Sarah and Marcus left the courtroom. Outside, the reporters swarmed them with cameras and microphones. Sarah had been coached by Robert Chen on what to say, and she delivered it without emotion, standing in front of the courthouse steps with Marcus beside her. "We are satisfied with the court's decision," Sarah said into the microphones. "Justice has been served. We are grateful that our daughter was not physically harmed in this incident. We hope that Ms. Knowles will use her time in prison to address her addiction and mental health issues, and that she will emerge as someone capable of contributing positively to her community. We also hope that this case will serve as a reminder to everyone about the dangers of driving under the influence. We are done with this legal process, and we are ready to move forward with our lives." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat in the backyard and looked at the empty pool. The contractors were scheduled to begin rebuilding it next week. In 3 months, it would be full again. In 3 months, Emma would be swimming, and the scars of this incident would begin to fade. But Sarah knew that some scars never fully healed. Some scars remained, a permanent reminder of how close you'd come to losing everything. She thought about Patricia, who would spend the next 18 months in prison. She thought about Patricia's daughter, Samantha, who would visit her mother in prison if she was brave enough, or who might choose not to visit at all. She thought about the years of recovery that stretched ahead of Patricia, the hardest work of her life. And Sarah thought about forgiveness, which was not something that could be ordered by a court or achieved through prison sentences. Forgiveness was something that had to be earned, day by day, choice by choice, action by action. Patricia Knowles had a long road ahead of her. Sarah hoped, for the sake of Patricia's daughter if nothing else, that Patricia would stay on that road this time. 1 year later, the new pool was finished. It was identical to the old one, though the concrete was pristine and the water was so clear you could see every tile at the bottom. Emma stood at the edge, in her new swim gear, preparing to dive. "Go ahead, baby," Sarah called from her lounge chair. "Show me what Derek taught you." Emma jumped, and her form was perfect. Derek's instruction over the past months had paid off. She emerged from the water laughing, the same joy in her face that had existed before the accident. Children were resilient. They adapted. They moved forward. Sarah was still working on that part. The insurance settlement had been finalized, and the final amount, after all the paperwork and investigation and legal wrangling, had been nearly equal to the damage. Sarah and Marcus had not had to sue. Patricia's insurance company had paid, and Patricia's restitution payment had gone into an account that Sarah set aside without touching. She wasn't sure what she would do with it. Part of her wanted to donate it to a mental health nonprofit, a way of turning Patricia's debt into something constructive. Part of her wanted to save it for Emma's college fund. She hadn't decided yet. The neighborhood had moved on. The story had faded from the local news cycle, replaced by other dramas and disasters. The Johnsons had their fence rebuilt, identical to the original. The hostess in front of the house had grown another foot. Life had returned to normal, or at least to a version of normal that looked like it on the surface. Marcus had installed security cameras, finally. They covered the front and back of the property, and they fed to an app on his phone that he checked obsessively. Sarah had asked him to stop checking it so often, but she understood the compulsion. They had been made vulnerable, and Marcus was trying to reassert control over his environment. Sarah had started therapy, something she'd been meaning to do for years but had never quite made time for. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Price, the irony of the name was not lost on Sarah, was helping her work through the trauma of the accident, the fear that lingered in her chest when she wasn't home, the anxiety that spiked every time Emma went outside. The accident happened, Dr. Price had said in their last session. It was serious, and it had real consequences. But your daughter is alive. Your daughter is healthy. Your daughter is thriving. The fact that bad things can happen at any moment is true, but it's been true your entire life. The accident just made that reality visible. Sarah was working on accepting that visibility. She was working on returning to a state of reasonable safety without excessive vigilance. She was working on being present instead of always preparing for the next disaster. 2 weeks earlier, Sarah had received a letter from Patricia. The letter had been screened by the prison, and it had been forwarded to her through her attorney. Patricia was in a state-run facility in upstate New York, in a unit dedicated to mental health and addiction treatment. She had completed the first phase of her drug treatment program. She was attending psychiatric. This is Patricia Knowles. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I wanted to let you know that I've been released. I'm in an outpatient treatment program. I'm working at a local bookstore. I'm in regular therapy. I'm trying to be the person I should have been all along. I'm not asking you to respond. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, sober, and committed to never driving a car while intoxicated again. Thank you for not completely destroying me when you had the chance. Sarah did not respond to the text. But she saved it, and she thought about it. That evening, Sarah asked Marcus to sit down with her. I think we should donate the restitution money to a mental health nonprofit, Sarah said. I think it should go specifically to funding addiction and psychiatric treatment for low-income individuals. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, if you think that's the right thing to do, then do it. It was not quite agreement, but it was acceptance. 3 months later, the Sarah and Marcus Chen Memorial Foundation for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery was established, with an initial endowment of $12,000. The money went toward funding treatment programs in 3 local organizations that served uninsured and underinsured individuals struggling with addiction and mental illness. Sarah never did take Patricia's suggestion about staying away. But she did find a kind of peace in the fact that Patricia had acknowledged her presence without demanding reciprocity. It was a small kindness, the kind of boundary setting that allowed Sarah to move forward without feeling like she was abandoning her principles. And on quiet evenings, sitting by the pool watching Emma swim, Sarah sometimes thought about Patricia in her bookstore, serving customers, living her recovered life. She thought about Patricia's daughter Samantha, hopefully rebuilding a relationship with her mother. She thought about the thin line between justice and mercy, between accountability and compassion. She thought about how easily it could have gone differently. How close Emma had come to being in the pool. How one moment of inattention on Patricia's part, a moment that Patricia still couldn't fully explain, that existed somewhere in the space between her addiction and her mental illness, had shattered her family's sense of safety.